Welcome. If you want help with getting help on IRC, you are in the right place. I am tethered here by probably the fanciest microphone that I've ever had pointed at me at a conference. So yeah, sitting over here is awesome. And with that, let's get going. So I hope that you're all here because you want to find out a bit more about how to get help on Internet Relay Chat. So I'm E. Dunham. You can kind of see me with the penguins. Was a weird kid. Now I'm a weird adult who spends a bunch of time on IRC, running some channels, helping others. And a few years ago, I was a total novice to it as well and got the benefit of learning all the stuff I'm going to talk to you about today from my peers because we all sat in the same room. But I recognize that if you're not sitting in the same room as a bunch of people who already know the tools and already know the culture, it can be really tough to get started. So my slides are online at that URL, talks.edunham.net/LinuxFest Northwest 2016/IRC, and they will just always be there. I don't move anything in those directories. So for this talk, we're going to get started by reviewing what IRC is. Just out of curiosity, if you're comfortable with a show of hands, how many people have heard of IRC but not really used it at all? Cool, about half the room. You are my target audience. The rest of you, anybody not heard of IRC just went, oh, I don't want to go to any of the other talks, maybe I'll learn something? Nope, and then the rest of you have probably used it a bit for some purposes and just want reassurance that you're doing it right or to pick up some new facts. So Internet Relay Chat has several components that I will talk to you about how they fit together and how to use them. And then we will go through the kind of politics and psychology of successfully getting help. So IRC itself is a protocol, not a specific implementation. It's like HTTP and HTTPS are the protocols that you use to access the web, but you can go to a bunch of different sites with them. You can use the IRC, and you can go to a bunch of sites from any of your choice of a number of browsers. In this metaphor, an IRC client, the thing you run, is like a web browser, and the IRC server, the thing you connect to, is kind of like a website. So there are many of them, and just saying, I'm on IRC, doesn't really tell you about where to find somebody. So the basic pieces that make up the IRC network itself are a bunch of servers. A server runs what's called an IRCD that connects to the other servers in the network as it's configured to, and lets people connect to it. So the servers make up a network, and typically a network will give you a URL that you connect to, and it'll pick a server for you. So let's look at how that happens. You, who are going to be represented by this little smiley face dude throughout the talk, open an IRC client of your choice, and I'll help you choose one later on, and you tell it that you want to connect to this particular network. And so that'll send a message to the network, it'll hit some server, it'll go, oh, this is a new connection, I better figure out where to put that. And the network will connect you to one of the servers on it.
Is there a reason why it connects you to a specific server?
Yeah, it'll pick the question was, is there a reason it connects you to a specific server? It can make its own decisions about that, but typically it will do it based on load balancing. If one server has a bunch of people and another server is relatively empty, you'll get better performance if you get put onto a less populated server. It can also do it geographically based on ping times. So if we're here in the Northwest and there's a server in Seattle and then the other server is in Europe, it'll probably try and put you on the Seattle one because you'll get a much faster round trip to it because of the speed of light in the cables. So you can request to connect to a specific server. This is usually a bad idea. The other thing that just connecting to the network will give you is if they need to take that server down for maintenance, your client will try to connect to the network again, and it'll get put onto a different server that is available. Whereas if you said, I want to connect to venus.examplespace.net, and then they took Venus down for maintenance, your client would just be like, Venus is gone, what do? I can't do anything. And you'd be offline. So once you're connected to a network, you join a channel by issuing the join command. Now, channels more or less exist across the network, although in the case of some network problems, the channel can appear to split, which we'll go into later. So you're sitting here on this network, you're in this channel, that's cool, that really doesn't give you anything until somebody else gets onto the network also. So they'll say, I want to connect to that network. They'll get put onto a server based on what's close to them or what's available, whatever heuristics that network is using. And then they'll join into a channel too. Now, that pound chat is, you can think of it as being the same channel across the entire network, regardless of the fact that people are connected through different servers. So when somebody says a message in that channel, it will go across the network and get distributed to everyone who's in that channel on that network. So that's more or less how IRC works in the tiniest nutshell that you can fit it into. I've skipped a few things. The things that you probably care about that I've skipped for the simplicity of the example are that there's a point where you have to tell the network what to call you. Like, how does Purple's IRC client know that that message came from somebody who's called Green? They would have had to set some configuration settings in their client to say, I should appear on the network as being named Green. There are more messages that will show up from the network to you. They'll tell you things like, Green has joined the channel, or Green has left the channel, or Green is away if Green has some bad client settings. And if Green is having some problems with their client, that can mean that you get an awful lot of messages you don't necessarily care about until you tell your client, nah, I don't care, stop telling me those things. So the other thing is that this is all asynchronous. It might be 9 a.m. in our time zone, and it might be 9 p.m. in the time zone that Green is connecting to a network from. And so maybe you'll leave a message there in the channel, and they won't see it until they get back online the next morning. So while IRC can be highly synchronous, remember that it's full of people from all over the world, and you can't really tell what time it is unless they tell you. So now that you know the basics, let's talk about how we actually connect to IRC, how we choose a client. In the metaphor of the IRC protocol being comparable to the HTTP or HTTPS protocol, the client is kind of like your web browser. It's the thing that you run to get onto a network. Some things that we're going to have to care about are what's called persistence. Will this stay connected if I shut my laptop? Will this stay connected if I lose cell service temporarily going through a tunnel on my phone, so that I'll be able to hear the things that people say when I'm not right here at my computer? It's especially important if you ask a question and then an hour later someone comes online and has an answer for you. You can only get that answer if you're still there. You might care about which devices it works on. You probably care about what platforms it works on, because you're going to want to be able to get to it from your laptop and maybe also from your phone once you start communicating with friends there, getting into a conference's IRC channel, and wanting to know what's up when you don't have your laptop out. And finally, the last concern we're going to have is, do you have a server that you can run something on? Because the easiest way to keep something online all the time is to just run a thing that's always online from a server that almost never goes down, and then connect into that from your devices that you're constantly turning on and off. So we have a bunch of different options. The absolute simplest is just a local client. I'll just invoke a client name here on my laptop, and then I'll connect straight to the network, probably Freenode with it. And then when I shut my laptop, my networking stack is going to go down, and that connection is going to drop. So everyone will see, oh, they've left the channel. You could have a persistent client. The way that people typically do this is they'll run a command line client in something that keeps it alive when you lose your connection to your server. So I personally use IRC in Screen, but that's as much out of force of habit as it is out of there actually being superior tools. WeChat and Tmux are just as good for this. And then from whatever device you're on, you can SSH your secure shell to your server, reconnect to that screen, reattach to that Tmux session, and then your client is back as if you never went offline. Another way you can do this, if you want to connect from like graphical pretty clients on your laptop, is that you can run what's called a bouncer, like ZNC is an example, on a server. And that bouncer will connect to IRC for you, will always be online, and then every time you connect from any client, it will replay all of the messages that you missed while you were disconnected. So that's good if you're particularly fond of a client that has a really pretty user interface that you can't run from the terminal. The drawback of a bouncer compared to just running a command line client is that you're going to have to install an IRC client on every device that you want to connect from. Whereas if you're just running IRC or WeChat on your server, you can connect to it from anywhere that you have SSH available. And finally, there's this weird, cool new thing called Matrix, which is technically trying to replace XMPP, the cross-functional chat standard. And they have this cloud. You can host your own thing, or you can use theirs, where you connect from your web browser to them, and then they connect a bunch of places, one of which is IRC. So they get you more or less the same effect as having a persistent client, but with less of the SSH and a whole lot more features that you might or might not want. So which client do we want to use? I'm going to tell you just the briefest overview of IRC, WeChat, Colloquy, Quassel, Matrix, and the Freenode web chat. There are more and more popular ones, but I've focused on ones with free and open licenses, and I've really just gone based on what other people who prefer graphical clients have said for those, because I personally prefer command line ones. So I use IRC, IRSSI. It's a command line client. It is written in Perl, and you extend it with Perl, which is a bit painful. There's a vast repository of user scripts that you can just kind of cargo cult in if you want them. I have stuck with IRC over WeChat because I find that the documentation is really good, and I find that when I have a problem, I have an easy time finding my own answer rather than having to go ask an established user of it. It's released under GPL v2. It works on all platforms if you're willing to use Cygwin on Windows. So WeChat is basically like IRC but better. It's another command line client. It's written in C. You can extend it with just about anything. Is somebody out there? Wave at them.
No.
Come on in. Okay.
I'll keep my eye out.
Oh yeah, that's cool. You can extend it with practically anything that you can write. It works on Linux, the BSDs, and OS X. I'm not sure how well it works natively on Windows, but you're probably going to be just using an SSH client to connect to it anyways. The reason that I have failed in trying to switch to WeChat is that the documentation, in my experience, assumes that you already know what the solution is to the question that you're looking for. And I don't personally learn well from a read the entire textbook and then go kind of style. So I have really struggled getting up to speed with WeChat and configuring it in a way that I'd like. So they're pretty comparable. You run them from the command line. You can run them inside of a screen or tmux session. Then let's talk about a bouncer. ZNC is the most popular bouncer out there. It's released under Apache 2 and implemented in C++. You just run it on your server. It has a web front end if you want to use that plugin for some more graphical, easy-to-use management of it. And the source is up there on GitHub for you. So let's say we want a pretty client to either connect to your bouncer from or to connect directly to the network from if you don't care about falling off when you power off your machine. If you're on a Mac, the most popular option seems to be Colloquy. It is written in Objective-C and extendable with, it's based on WebKit, so you can extend it with just web stuff. It works on OS X and iOS, and the OS X version is licensed under GPL, and the iOS version is licensed as BSD. And it gives you a really nice, shiny interface like you'd expect if you prefer Macs. And then a completely cross-platform alternative that works on Windows, works on Mac, and will work on your Linux distro if you don't like whatever thing your Linux distro shipped with. Well, typically it's your desktop environment that'll ship with some client or another, is Quassel, which will look about like that. That's a screenshot of the Windows version, actually. So it's still pretty much usable. It's implemented in C++ with Qt4, so if you want to get into Qt programming, hacking on the user interface might be a good idea. It's fully cross-platform and released under the GPL, so that's one of your free alternatives to like MIRC or other more closed clients. So then there's also that Matrix thing I was telling you about. Basically, if you go to vector.im/beta, this is the instant messaging platform for the Matrix network, and they'll give you a little bit of free hosting for it. it looks a lot like the client, like the tool called Slack that's sort of slowly trying to take over IRC, but you can connect to IRC networks just fine from it. The one catch is that you will typically have an M prefaced to your nickname, and this shows that you're coming from Matrix, and people will ask you about it, and then you can tell them that it's cool. Matrix, similarly to IRC, is technically just a set of specifications, but really they've released reference implementations for an IRC client and for clients that you can run in your browser. And it's trying to replace XMPP. And finally, if you're just like, this is insane, I don't want to install any software, I just want to be online for 5 minutes to test something, a web chat like webchat.freenode.net is great. It uses QWebIRC, of which you could probably spin up your own server if you so desired, which itself is GPL2. The one thing about the Freenode web chat is that it is Freenode specific. You can go to a site called Mibit and get web chat on a lot more networks, but Mibit is proprietary and they try to make you pay, and generally, if you don't care as much about the freedom of your software and you just want to get on IRC, it'll work for you. So where do you actually put this? A bunch of these suggestions are based on the assumption that you have a server available to you. So some ideas for getting a hold of enough hosting to run an IRC client, which is pretty tiny, are if you're a student, your school probably has a shell server. I went to Oregon State and they had just shell.owned.oregonstate.edu where you could run whatever you wanted. If you're an engineering student, you probably have even better shell hosting. And if you don't care a whole lot about the privacy of your messages and any logs you save, this can be a great option. Also, if you're technically a student, if you're enrolled anywhere, you can go to github.com/edu and get this education pack that includes like $100 of DigitalOcean credit. DigitalOcean is the VPS that I personally use because they go down to a very cheap little server and I don't really need anything more than that. I host my website on it. You're reading these slides from it if you're following along. And one that works just fine for IRC is the $5 a month droplet size. So if you want something easier, cheaper, or free, but potentially a little bit less private, you can look at tuxfamily.org for some shared hosting, and Fire is a reasonably popular client. They'll just host some IRC for you. The catch with Fire is that you need to have your IRC nickname registered for 60 days, and your GitHub account must be 60 days old. So once you've been involved for a while and you need some free hosting, they're great. But if you're just starting out, you'll want to use other options until you've established your identities for a bit longer. And finally, ask a friend who has a VPS, a virtual private server somewhere, to whether you can run your IRC from there. They'll probably say yes. Every once in a while, they'll probably like reboot and forget to tell you, or at least I do that for the friends that run their IRC on my VPS, because I am a less diligent sysadmin about my personal things than my work things. And that will be pretty much just as good. So now we've covered basically how IRC works. It's a bunch of servers attached together in a network, and channels exist network-wide. You talk in channels, or you can send private messages to other individuals with the message command. You can connect to it directly from a client on your local device, or you can keep your connection alive, which is really what you want if you're going to ask a question and come back for the answer later, by using a persistent client or a bouncer. And you have a wide variety of client options. If you want something that's just right in your command line, you just run it on your server and connect to your server. IRC or WeChat. If you want to extend it at all, WeChat is probably your best bet. If you're on a Mac, Colloquy is popular. If you're on another system and for some reason your Linux distro didn't ship with an IRC client, Quassel can be a good choice. Matrix is hosted and offers a bunch more features as an XMPP replacement. And the Freenode web chat is just your backup, wait, I want to get a second account in this channel, I want to see what's going on type of option. So when you get onto IRC, you're going to have to choose a name to go by. And this can be kind of tough. So your nickname, people also call it a nick or a handle, you can have one instance of each string connected to the network. The nickname actually basically uniquely identifies your connection, and then you can change that name by using the nick command later. So the rules that apply to choosing a nick are basically the rules that a career guidance counselor would tell you apply to choosing your email address. It should be probably kind of professional if you're going to be using this for anything work-related. You will have a worse time getting help if your nickname offends people. And if you have a nickname that specifically refers to something that would otherwise be taboo in a conversation, you've just invited conversation about it. Think a bit about anonymity. You probably don't want like your street address in it. You may want to use some mashup of your full name so that you're not as uniquely identifiable. And it's generally polite not to change it too often. One of the things I'm going to emphasize when we talk about the psychology of getting help is that you want to give someone as much background information as you can on what your problem is. And a really important piece of background information you can give them is, I'm the same person who was asking about this other thing last week. And you'll only provide them with that if you keep a relatively consistent nickname. And finally, this basically answers the question, who are you? It's better to err on the side of a more nonsensical nick than a really long or really specific one, as I'll go into. But let's talk about first impressions, because this is also the extent of a first impression that you get to make on people until you start saying things. So I introduced these slides with this picture of me as a little kid with a bunch of penguins, and was like, haha, I was a weird kid. This also told you some more things about me. This told you that I was nerdy. My choice of the penguins told you that I like Linux a lot and want to make a Linux joke. I could have used a different picture and said, haha, I was a weird kid, and you probably would have gotten a different first impression. So this one time I was giving a chicken a bath. It's a really long story. But if I'd used that on my cover, you might have been like, wait, what? Okay, this person is kind of rural, kind of, what has this got to do with tech? Kind of scary, they do strange things I don't understand. Basically, you kind of make judgments about people. Everybody makes snap judgments or assumptions about others, and those are really useful in social interactions. But you have complete control over what that first impression is when you choose your nickname. Another important concern is that you want to be kind of unique. You can only have one instance of each nickname on the network. So if I'm nicked as eDunham on Freenode and you get onto Freenode and you try to change your nickname to eDunham, the network will be like, you can't do that. You want to be eDunham _? You want to be eDunham with 2 underscores? Or if my nickname is protected, it'll say, you want to be guest with a big long number? So the network's going to force you to have a unique nick, but something with a bunch of underscores or guest with a number just tells everybody that you don't really know what you're doing in terms of keeping your own nickname. So if you're just starting out in open source and you're picking your nick for the first time, keep in mind that this is probably what you're going to want to use on Freenode at least, and possibly other IRC networks, on GitHub, and very likely on Twitter, as well as probably other services. So if you're picking a new name, check that it's available in those places. Additionally, if you're using your work that you do in open source and on GitHub as a portfolio, a nice compliment to have is if the URL is available, especially if the last couple characters of your nickname are a top-level domain, then your nickname minus those characters should be available in that top-level domain space. Like Ben Caro goes by bcaro on online, and he has bke.ro. It's a fun little thing that people with appropriately formed nicknames will sometimes do. So when you're picking your nick, Google the word you're going to use and look it up on the site called urbandictionary.com. Because if you pick something you think is random, other people might not think it's random, and it's kind of bad to find out that it means something really obscure and not representative of you in the slightest after you're already committed to using it. And another good thing to know about the way that most people's IRC clients work is that you type the first couple letters of someone's name, and then you hit the tab key, and it auto-completes the rest of it. This tells us 2 things. First, don't be afraid if your nickname is hard to spell. Second, if you have 2 or 3 or 4 characters in common at the start of your nick with someone else in the same channel, it's going to be really frustrating to everybody trying to address one or the other of you, and you're going to get what we call mispinged a lot. Someone's going to be trying to talk to the other person, type the first couple characters, hit tab, get your nickname instead, and then your client will say, somebody's talking to you, and you go, what's going on? So if you're engaging with a specific community, shooting for uniqueness of like the first 3 characters or so can be a nice bonus. And at the end of the day, some combination of your real or preferred names, the things you want people to call you, is a really safe bet. A shorter nick is better than a longer nick. And nonsense, as long as it actually is nonsense and not some obscure slang for something terrible, is totally fine. Some of the hazards that you'll run into: if you pick a super long name, everybody's going to shorten it as you make friends with them, and you're going to get a nickname whether you want it or not. People's pronunciation varies. What sounds perfectly innocent to you might not sound very good if somebody else says it out loud with an accent. It's kind of a pain to everyone around you if you change your name constantly. If you use the name of a famous character, like if you sign on to Freenode and say, "I am Mickey Mouse," it's like you're wearing a mask. It's like you're not really wanting to share who you are or what uniquely identifies you. It's like you're kind of disguising yourself. Especially don't try to go try to make a nickname that's almost identical to a project leader's, because that's just dishonest and sketchy. And don't nick to like CEO of Google unless you're actually the CEO of Google, because everybody will be like, "What? Why are you doing that? You seem like a dishonest person," and not really get a good first impression of you. As I alluded to earlier, if you refer to something that would ordinarily be taboo in that discussion, or even that's just irrelevant to that discussion, you're inviting discussion of that topic. I see that a lot, especially if somebody goes like, "Nick, Geek Girl Gamer." Why is everybody pinging me about the fact that I'm a girl? Maybe because you put it in your nickname. And a name that's super trendy right now is going to seem kind of dated and funny later on, which you might or might not be okay with. So now that you've picked a name that you think you want to go by, just use the nick command in most clients, or possibly in the nickname box, change what it says if you're doing something pretty and graphical, to set your nickname to that. And then we want to keep this nickname, right? We want to keep other people from using it. So if you message the nickserv on whatever network you're connected to for help with registering, it will walk you through the process of how to register your nickname. Typically, you'll get an email with a one-time code. Typically, you'll copy and paste that one-time. It says message nickserv, confirm random string. And you'll copy that, and then you'll paste it into your client, and then you accidentally copied the space from the start, and so that shows up in a public channel if you did it wrong, and then everybody goes, "Haha, I'll steal your nick." That's not actually the case. That one-time code isn't your password. So to avoid those pitfalls, make sure you type it directly into your query or your conversation with nickserv, rather than typing that when you're in a channel. And then every time that you reconnect, for whatever reason, if you want to go by that nickname, you're going to have to identify. And so when nickserv walked you through how to register, he will have had you set a password. And you'll say, "Identify your nickname, your password." And then you will tell your client either not to log that buffer, or if it's WeChat, it'll just hide your password for you. And generally, don't let that password get out, because anybody will be able to use your nickname if they have it. Now, at the same time, you don't want it to be like your top secret, ultra secure password that you use everywhere, because it may show up in your logs, and in some cases, it may be visible on the screen briefly.
Excuse me.
Yes.
So you're saying if you have to, I don't have a home server, so I just connect to IRC once in a while.
Yep.
I have to do that identify. It seems like I have to do that identify every time I log back in again.
You'll have to. So the question is, if you don't have a home server, you just connect occasionally, will you have to identify every time you log in? The short answer, yes. The long answer, after about a dozen times of this, you'll get sick of it, and you'll Google client name automatically auth to services, and then it will tell you, if you're using IRC, you'll use capsassel.perl, and you'll put your username and password in a specific file, and every time it connects to a network, it'll automatically do that for you. Or if you have another client, it'll tell you just which box you put your password in your saved client settings, if you trust your local machine, to automatically do that for you.
Okay, so I can set that in IRC in some kind of
Yep,
file.
You'll actually want to install a Perl script. I think it's capsassel.perl, because IRC doesn't support that out of the box. IRC's kind of ancient. IRC's generally less good than WeChat on most axes, except in my experience, the docs. If you have a graphical client also, you'll probably find this in the interface under like auth to services is what it's called. And then you'll get a little +I by your name as well, and people will be able to tell that you're identified, and some channels will have a rule saying only people with registered nicknames who are identified to that nick are allowed to talk in here if they've had a problem with bots or spammers. So, we're halfway through. Let's talk about the other thing that I promised you, actually getting help on IRC. So, there's basically 4 steps to getting help, and you might find that you solve your own problem halfway through if you follow these. First, define exactly what the problem is. Second, make the problem reproducible. Third, ask at the right time, in the right place. And fourth, be polite and patient. How do you define the problem? I have Mad Libs here for you that will basically ask a good question every time. You set up the background of, I'm using this to do that. When I do this particular thing, this other thing happens, but that wasn't what I expected because of such and such a piece of docs that made you think it would work differently. And here's what it did instead. You might find that when you try to explain exactly what you did with the tool, you realize you accidentally forgot something important. You might find that when you look for a piece of documentation confirming that you were expecting the right thing, you were actually expecting totally the wrong thing for this command and solve your own problem. When you try to really clearly describe the actual outcome that you got, you might find that it actually did the thing you wanted but in a different place. And I would say that 90% of helping new IRC users with their problems is figuring out what fits in each of these blanks. And only once you have the right thing in each of those blanks do you actually really have a real problem rather than please go read the docs. So another thing that's important, and the reason that I say you start with I'm using this tool to accomplish that goal, is because of this thing called the XY problem. Basically, the boring way of putting it is the user wants to do X. The user doesn't know how to do X, but thinks they can get to it from Y. Thinks if only they could Y, they'd be able to find a way to X. The user doesn't know how to do Y either, so they ask about Y. And you get some weird questions. You get questions like, how do I take the safety guard off of a chainsaw? Hey, pound chainsaws on Freenode. Tell me, how do I take the safety guard off of a chainsaw? This is an important question. It will solve my problem. And then somebody will say, oh, well, you undo this screw and this bolt, and here's the instruction manual. And somebody else will say, well, why would you want to do that? And then I'll say, well, it won't fit when I stick the chainsaw through the fence. And they go, why are you sticking a chainsaw through a fence? And I go, well, I've got to cut down my neighbor's tree. Well, why is that? Because my cat's stuck in the tree and I need to get the cat down. Have you tried putting out a can of tuna to lure your cat out of the tree? Oh. You start with the actual problem at hand. Sometimes saying, I'm using X for Y will itself point out an XY problem to you, and you can solve that. Your question can go from, I don't know, how do I write a bash script to start this service, to what should I be using to automatically start services on boot? And then, once you know you haven't got an XY problem, once you have some source that you can cite that suggests you're actually using the right tool for the job, or you've just asked and somebody's told you that you seem to be using the right tool for the job, make your problem reproducible. I love the photocopier metaphor. It's both a problem and it reproduces things. If you're confused about something, that is a problem. If you've read the docs and you're still confused, that is a problem with the documentation. And you can offer to help improve the docs once people get you less confused. So you state what you're looking for, what you want to do, what search terms you used, or just what part of it you didn't understand. If you have some software problem that's intermittent or something, you can't always reproduce it. The problem with reproducing it is itself something you need to go get help with. Your problem turns from, well, sometimes my E key doesn't work when I have Chrome open, to how do I reproduce a problem, an intermittent keyboard problem? Like where do I troubleshoot? What logs do I look at? And often, once you get your problem reproducible, you'll suddenly know a whole lot more about what's at the root cause. Next, how do you ask at the right time and the right place on IRC? Well, first, you've got your problem reproducible. You're pretty sure it's not an XY problem. You have an idea of what tool the problem is in. So you find that tool, you find its docs, and you look for IRC. A few ways you can do this. You can grep, which is a search tool on the Linux command line, for the string IRC, case insensitive, in the project source, documentation, or website. You could take a guess on Freenode. If I'm using a tool called Ansible, and I connect to Freenode and I /join #Ansible, there's probably going to be a bunch of Ansible users there. It's just Freenode is such a big network that tends to be how it works. Or you could Google the name of the project along with IRC, and it'll probably suggest a channel and a network for you. That should get you into the right channel. When you think you're in the right place, use the command /topic to see what the topic of the channel is. If there are links in it, read the links. Like, if you join into #Rust on a gaming-focused network, you're probably going to be talking about the Rust game, whereas on a development-focused network, you're probably going to be talking about the Rust programming language. Now, some people use both, but nobody's going to be super amused if you get the discussion off-topic, confusing one with the other. So, once you know you're in the right place because the channel topic tells you you're in the right place, when do you ask? So, it depends on the channel. It always depends on the channel. But the rule of lurk more will never go wrong. Hang out in the channel for a couple of hours if you can. Leave your client connected there overnight, which is why I suggest a persistent client so strongly. See how busy it is. In the first 5 minutes, you'll be able to tell whether it's a super quiet channel or a really active discussion. Respect the fact that everybody is at a different subjective time of day. May or may not be due to where in the world they live. May just be due to a weird sleep schedule. And when you see that a discussion is relatively active, but you're not really interrupting the only person who's talking or whatever, just go ahead and drop your question in after you've been on for, I'd say, at least 5 minutes. If nobody answers, you can try again later, or you can try getting involved in helping someone else solve a problem and then changing the topic once you've got an active conversation going to part of what the problem you were having is. And finally, if the IRC channel is just totally dead, you've had your client in there for a day, you've asked, nobody's answered, or you use the /names command, and you see that there's only like 4 people there, you probably want to find a different place to ask. You might want to ask on a mailing list if the project has one of those and it's active. They might have a forum, or there might be a forum that somebody else hosts that's really active with users of the project. Or maybe just the issue tracker, either the GitHub issue tracker or wherever they direct you to in the README instead. So basically, hop in, wait 5 minutes, ask your question, see what happens. Typically, you'll get either an answer or a request for clarification. And finally, be polite and patient. There's my favorite XKCD about this is public service announcement. The right to free speech means that the government can't arrest you for what you say. It doesn't mean that anyone else has to listen to what you're saying or host you while you share it. The First Amendment doesn't shield you from criticism or consequences. If people react poorly, it's just the people listening think they don't like you and they're showing you the door. So basically, so many people online don't realize and or abide by this, and I have a feeling that since you're coming to a conference talk telling you how to successfully get help, you're already far ahead of those people. But if you notice yourself getting impolite, getting impatient, yelling at people because you feel entitled to an answer for whatever reason that these volunteers are like obligated to give you their time, just stop, take a step back, and think about what result you actually want to get from that conversation. A critical part of being polite, especially in a medium where you know so little about the person on the other end, is to examine what you're assuming about them. And my heuristic here is, what have I guessed about this person based on how they've been talking, based on what they might have mentioned? okay, would I make this statement even if everything I've guessed about them was actually the opposite? For instance, let's say I'm on the Linux Checks network hanging out in a chat channel. I'm probably going to assume that I'm talking to someone about my age or up to about retirement age, probably a lady because it's Linux Checks, probably from the US, Europe, or maybe India, and probably involved in a tech career. Now, would I say whatever I'm about to if somebody's a guy who's like 12 or 80 and they're in Russia or they're in Brazil and they work in some totally other profession or they don't work at all? And if you're about to say something that might go over really poorly with some group, you maybe shouldn't be saying it in a professional setting. Another thing to catch assumptions about is people's preferred pronouns. You have no clue whether somebody goes by he, she, or they. So part of respecting everybody else's time is to not sidetrack the discussion into a whole bunch of correction. And the easiest way to do that is to just assume that people go by they until you get specific information otherwise. Like, people who go by lady pronouns really don't like it when you call them guy pronouns. People who go by guy pronouns are typically a bit more casual about it, but don't really like it when you call them lady pronouns either. So how else can you just generally be respectful of people's time? Don't put a whole bunch of lines into chat unless you have to, because everybody else has to read that, and that takes quite a while when you add up how many people are in the channel and how long it takes them to read it. How do you not flood? How do you not dump a whole bunch of lines? If you've got something long that you want to paste, use a paste bin site. There'll probably be one linked in the topic if it's a larger channel, or you can just go to pastebin.org. Dump your stuff in there, paste the link into IRC along with your question, but not the logs themselves. And beware that some clients will do kind of weird things if you've got a bunch of lines in your clipboard. If you have a client running on your VPS, and then you've SSH'd into it from a Windows machine using the tool called Putty, and then you right-click, it's going to paste whatever's in your clipboard, including any enter characters at the end, which will then send it to whatever IRC channel you have open at the time. An easy way to avoid this, or to test what your client will do when you do certain things, or when you hit paste, is to join into a channel that you think will be empty. Joining a channel creates it, by the way. So if you /join space your nickname -test -channel, I can pretty much guarantee you there'll be nobody else there for you to interrupt. And then in that test channel, you can try your color codes, you can paste and see what happens, you can right-click and see if that pastes your entire clipboard. And then you'll know what's going on and you won't make these mistakes in a big public channel. Again, use /topic to read what's in the channel topic. Read whatever links there are, and follow the rules that the discussion wants to abide by. Additionally, if you read all the rules and somebody comes in and starts breaking them, think twice before you try to enforce the channel rules for them. You can gently suggest to somebody that something is off topic, but often having the entire channel jump on someone gives them the attention that they were looking for and totally derails the discussion worse than whatever they were saying or doing. Yes, question.
I haven't used IRC very much. I find it really weird that it doesn't provide for, not just in implementation, but maybe in the protocol, it doesn't provide for the system itself to instantly make a link to its own paste bin, but you have to go to some other provider.
Oh yeah, the comment was that she's used IRC a bit and finds it strange that the IRC network doesn't automatically paste bin things for you. So that's a really good point. And this is mostly because IRC was developed way back in the day, in like the 80s, and network bandwidth was at a premium. They made a lot of design decisions when they were putting IRC together that would not have been the right choice if we had more bandwidth available. And you can have a client that will automatically paste bin things for you. And the way that channels handle this is they have flood control sometimes. If somebody sends more than 5 lines in a certain number of seconds, it'll trigger it, and nobody can hear what they're saying to the channel for a bit. So finally, basically, when you're in a conversation with somebody and trying to get help from them, what you want to do is compare your goals to theirs. what are you trying to get out of this? Do you want them to fix the problem you ran into? Do you just want a workaround? You just want to feel heard, that somebody understands that you spent hours being frustrated today. And what are they getting out of this conversation? Why are they helping you? Do they want to see their open source project succeed? Do they want a distraction from something else that's going on, so they're just hanging out on chat, maybe picking an argument? Do they want respect or admiration for their work? And then if you can get some indication of whether they want a particular thing from their involvement, and this will often show in the documentation that's linked in the channel topic, then you can go above and beyond by helping give them a bit more of that. If they're trying to be really helpful so that their project can get a good reputation for its community and be more successful that way, well, you can help build that reputation by blogging or tweeting about how helpful they were. And that's a really nice way of giving back once a channel has helped you with a problem. So, looks like we've got about, well, there's 10 minutes left, which I think is 10 minutes of my session because I haven't had a room monitor coming and waving at me. So, what happens if you ask a question and everybody else is talking and they just don't answer you? It doesn't feel super great, but there are several troubleshooting things you should do. First, look at what you asked. Did you ask something that scared everyone away? Did you say, are there any Linux experts here? I'm a professional DevOps engineer. I run Linux systems for a living. I have on and off and in various levels of part-time while being a computer science student for the past 5 or 6 years. When somebody hops into a channel and says, are there any Linux experts here? I'm not going to raise my hand. I mean, I'll call them on it and say, what's your actual question? But I'm not going to say I'm a Linux expert because I expect they're going to ask that one question that I don't know the answer to and make me sound dumb. And it's not just me. When you see somebody hop into a channel and say that, they get crickets. If you asked a well-formed question, connect to the channel from another client, maybe Freenode web chat, and just watch when you type something from your main client, see if the message is actually getting through. Some channels occasionally will just silently mute people who maybe aren't registered or aren't auth to services. You can use whois and your own nickname to see whether or not you're auth to services at the time. So if you're connected, if they can hear you, or if a random other client in the channel can hear you, clarify or reduce the question. Rather than saying, how do I fix it? Say, where would you look for more help? What would you do next if you ran into this? Because again, someone might not feel like they have the whole answer, but they might have part of the puzzle. If the channel's just quiet, wait till other people are getting help. Help out. Help answer questions when somebody who's even newer than you is having a problem. And then once you're in a conversation about something, you can bring up parts of your own problem, and you will have gained some respect from the community and from the experts around. And finally, try asking somewhere else if your question just doesn't get an answer on IRC. Try Stack Overflow, try the GitHub issue tracker, try rereading the README and seeing what it says about where to ask questions. So, to recap, basically, the 4-step process for getting help that will often cause you to solve your own problem partway through, but will give you better results, is first, you define the problem. Say, I'm trying to use this to do that. When I do this thing, which I think should have worked because of this piece of docs, it actually does this other thing instead. Make the problem reproducible. Make sure you can tell them, it seems to happen on Linux, but it doesn't happen on this other distro, what have you. It seems to be a problem with Apache because when I use it on a different site, I still have the problem. Thank you. Okay, 5 minutes, awesome. And ask at the right time and in the right place to the best of your ability, and be polite and patient, and generally don't be a jerk. So, we have 5 more minutes. I have some buffer slides in case I manage to go through the beginning of it really fast. But right now, any questions? Yes?
I probably should Google this, but since you're here, what's a cloak?
Yep. Oh, what is a cloak? A cloak is a more advanced IRC thing. Basically, when you connect to a network and someone uses the whois command to find out what your client says your name and stuff are, sometimes it'll show the IP address that you're connected from. And on some networks, you can get a special, you can basically tell the network to not show your IP when you're authenticated to your account, but instead show your project name and then your name, or unaffiliated and your name. And this helps with your anonymity. On Freenode, if you want an unaffiliated cloak, you register your nickname, you hop into #Freenode, and you ask for a cloak, and then a staffer will private message you, and they'll attach that to your account. Other networks, the Mozilla IRC network, doesn't really do cloaks, but instead they'll anonymize your IP address that you're connected from.
So basically, cloak like turning your identification into marketing, right?
Yeah, a cloak can be used to turn your identification into marketing. It can say, I was involved with this project for a while. It can be, I've made a significant contribution to this project. Cloaks, most projects don't take away cloaks, even if you stop being as involved. So like, I'm no longer an employee of the OSU Open Source Lab, but still if you who is E. Dunham on Freenode, you'll see OSL staff E. Dunham because I'm alumni from there. So it's a way of saying, oh, hey, that person used to work at OSL. That's neat. While not being able to tell precisely where I'm connected from. So, any other questions, or shall I fill the final 5 minutes with a whirlwind tour of some more technical stuff? Okay, let's see if I can't teach those of you who've already used IRC to some extent something new. You can use SSL to connect to the network. It's typically on port 6697. Also, Freenode exposes a couple more. In the Freenode FAQ, you can get to all the things, but if you connect to the round-robin DNS, the network's name, so it can choose what server to put you on, and you say port 6697, it will encrypt your connection instead of sending your messages in plain text. Some channels, if you message chanserve help, it'll help flags, it will tell you about how to set them, have a restriction set saying only people with an encrypted connection are allowed to join this channel. This can be good if you're going to be exchanging slightly sensitive information and you want to make sure that nobody's eavesdropping. So how do you start your own channel? You just join into a channel. You can ask chanserve, the services bot, for help registering the channel. And then you tell people you think actually want to be there about it. You do not jump into like #Python or #Freenode and say, join my channel. That is extremely uncouth. It's like hopping into the middle of a keynote lecture and yelling about how people should visit your website. So that's how you make a channel. How about network being weird? Let's say that due to infrastructure problems in the networking, suddenly one server can no longer talk to the other two. This looks to everyone involved, they'll see net split, and then green and yellow will see net split, blue and purple have left, and blue and purple will see net split, green and yellow have left, because neither of those halves knows what's going on the other side. Maybe they all fell offline at once. Maybe there was an electromagnetic pulse that took out North America and there's no more electricity here, so there's no more IRC. Or maybe just a link went down, a couple of links went down, and you can't route from here to there right now. So green and yellow can keep right on talking to each other because the servers they're on are still connected. Purple and blue on the bottom can keep right on talking to each other because the servers they're on are still connected. But nobody can, but it's like it's two separate channels now. There's the chat channel on either side of the net split. And then once that heals up, somebody fixes the DNS and the connections come back, you'll see net split over. These people have joined, whoever was on the other side of it before. And then the two conversations will kind of merge awkwardly because blue and purple don't know what green and yellow were talking about and vice versa. And finally, you can use the names command to list everybody who's in the channel if your client doesn't do it for you. If somebody has a little at the start of their name, you don't call them by that. That means they're an operator in the channel. Someone can have operator permissions and yet not have their hat on, not have it publicly visible. A plus means that they're voiced. You can sometimes set a channel so that only people who are voiced are allowed to talk, which if somebody's spamming you can be useful. Some networks have a whole lot more. And there are a variety of services. They're robots. They'll do your bidding if you give them commands in just the right syntax. On Freenode, you should never use /list to list all the channels because there's so dang many of them. Instead, you should message the bot named Alice. And finally, piece of trivia. If I have one IRC client and I want to have 2 different NICs in the same channel because I want to talk to myself or something, what should I do? If I make a second connection to the Freenode network, or to whatever network I'm on, then that second connection can have its own nickname. So 2 totally different names can actually be the same person. And the channel will show up twice as 2 different buffers for you. And you can have as many NICs on a network as you want by doing your connections separately. So I think we've run out of time. My slides are online at that URL. I've also tweeted the URL if that's easier for you. You can ping me on Freenode or Mozilla IRC. I'm E. Dunham there. And you can send me emails if you have any questions. So thank you very much for your time.